Montana Territory, 1883. The breeze sliced sharply through the canyon, biting with grit and the echo of cold months. When she stumbled from the train and fell face first onto the splintered wooden deck of Red Rock Station, she hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her lip was cracked, one eye nearly puffed closed, her gown ripped at the edge, and her shoes worn to ruin. Yet it was the way her fingers shook that made the station manager step back. She seemed like a woman who'd fled from torment. "Ma'am?" he inquired, but she gave no reply. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed, too battered to stand. It was the rancher who caught her. Yates O'Connor had been lounging against a fence post, awaiting a delivery of barbed wire. He saw her drop before anyone else reacted. In 2 swift steps, he was there, kneeling beside her, slipping his arm beneath her shoulders and lifting her as if she were no heavier than a leaf caught in the wind. Her head lolled against his chest, her breathing faint, her skin pale under dirt and marks. But she was alive. "Where's the doctor?" Yates snapped at the station manager. "Town's 4 miles out. Nearest doc's there. I'll take her." Yates didn't wait for approval. He carried her to his buckskin horse, settled her gently in front of his saddle, and galloped toward town. Her gown was drenched in sweat and grime, her frame too frail, her wrists scarred with bruises that told a tale no one should endure. She stirred once during the ride, just long enough to recoil when his arm shifted too near. "Easy," he murmured gently. "You're safe now." She glanced up at him for a moment before slipping back into whatever refuge she'd found to survive. They reached Dr. Keller's clinic by twilight. The old physician took one look and gestured Yates inside. "Lay her on the cot. I'll fetch what I need." Yates placed her down, brushed a tangled wisp of hair from her face, then stepped back. He didn't leave. He stood by the door, arms folded, jaw clenched, watching. Hours passed before the doctor finally said, "She'll survive, but she needs rest, food, time." "What happened to her?" Yates asked. The doctor shook his head. "That's hers to tell." Yates stayed that night in a chair by her bedside, not yet understanding why. Something about the way she'd fallen silently, as if she'd clung to everything and finally released, lingered with him. She stirred the next morning, blinking against the sunlight. He was there, holding a tin of steaming tea. "Morning," he said. She tensed. "I won't harm you," he added. "You collapsed at the station. I brought you here." Her gaze darted to the door, then the window, mapping escape. "I'm Yates O'Connor. I run a cattle spread west of here." She stayed silent. "You got a name?" She stared at her hands, then finally croaked. Kala Zane." He nodded. "You hungry?" "Kala Zane?" Her eyes welled. She nodded once. He stood. "Then let's get you fed." Days passed slowly. Kala spoke little, allowing only Yates near, not even the doctor. She never asked why he stayed. He just appeared each morning, bringing warm food, sitting by her as she sipped broth, saying little but steady as the peaks outside. One day, she whispered, "Thank you." He glanced over. "You owe me nothing." She looked away. "I didn't think anyone would help." He didn't ask what she'd fled. Not yet. Her bruises were fading, and she sat up more, her eyes regaining color. On the 5th day, she broke. "I had 2 children," she said abruptly, eyes glassy. "Willa and Weston, 5 and 7. A man took them, said I wasn't fit, said he had wealth and I had nothing." Yates sat still. "Who is he?" "My husband. Once he beat me until I couldn't see, then told the court I was unstable. I tried to take the kids and run. He found me. I barely reached the train." Her voice broke. "I don't know where they are." Yates clenched his fists. "Did you tell the sheriff?" She shook her head. "He has money, allies. They don't trust women like me." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not alone anymore, Kala." She blinked rapidly. "Why do you care?" He stood, walked to the window. "Because I saw you collapse at that station, like you'd carried the whole world. No one should live like that." She was silent for a long time, then said, "I don't want to hide anymore." He turned. "Then don't." Her chin quivered. "What if he finds me again?" "Let him try." Weeks passed. Kala moved into a small room above the feed store, sweeping and tidying for board. Yates visited often, bringing apples, books, small things he never fussed over. She laughed for the first time when he stumbled over a stray cat in the alley behind the store. "You're not as tough as you seem," she teased, grinning. "And you're tougher than you know," he replied. She looked at him, then really looked. He was tall, sun-worn, with a quiet manner, kind eyes that saw everything and judged nothing. One evening, as the sun sank low, she asked, "Why are you still here?" Yates leaned on the porch rail beside her. "Because I want to be." She looked at her hands. "You don't know me." He reached over, gently touched her fingers. "I know enough." She didn't pull away. They said nothing more, but from that night, he held her hand whenever she allowed. She never collapsed again, but when she faltered, he was already there. High summer heat arrived early, blanketing the valley like a thick quilt. Dust clung to hems and collars, and the scent of mown hay drifted from fields west of town. Kala's steps grew steadier. She took to walking back trails by the river in the early mornings before the store opened, where cottonwoods lined the banks and water murmured over stones. She carried a borrowed satchel with bread and cheese, sometimes sitting where deer drank, letting time pass in silence. She found him there one morning, crouched by the creek, coaxing a splinter from his palm with a pocket knife. "You always up this early?" she asked, nearly smiling. Yates looked up, unsurprised. Only when the cattle don't need wrangling. She set her satchel down, perched on a flat rock. You working less now? No. Just earlier. Gives me time to think. She folded her hands in her lap. About what? He flicked the splinter into the water. What's next? She watched the ripples. I haven't let myself think that far. He stood, brushing dust from his trousers. Then let me ask plain. You still planning to keep running? Kala didn't answer at first, tracing a line in the dirt with her boot. I don't want to, but I don't know what staying looks like. Yates sat beside her. It could look like a job at the school. They're short a woman to help the young ones. Miss Cartwright mentioned it. Kala blinked. She doesn't know me. She knows what you've done since you got here. I don't know teaching. You know how to listen. That's more than most. She pulled her knees up, rested her chin on them. What if I can't get my children back? I don't have an answer for that, he said, but you'll never stop trying. They sat in silence until the sun crested the ridge. When she stood, she looked down at him. I'll go see Miss Cartwright. He nodded, and she walked back to town, her shoulders straighter than the day before. By week's end, she started at the school. The children were cautious at first, quiet and curious, but Colin helped to their level, waiting, not pressing. By the second day, a girl left a ribbon on her chair. She mentioned it to Yates that evening while shelling peas outside the livery. I used to braid Willa's hair with blue ribbons like that. Yates didn't speak, just handed her more pods. She cracked one open, then said, I wrote the court in Kansas City. Used a name they won't recognize. He glanced over. Think they'll respond? I don't know, but if I don't ask, they never will. He worked quietly beside her. You ever think what you'd do if you got them back? She looked at the sky where stars were emerging. I'd find a place with trees, near water. Nothing grand. Just somewhere they could run without fear. Yates looked at her. Something unspoken passing between them. I know a place like that, he said. Old barn. Stream behind it. Been quiet since old man Rourke passed. She turned to him. Why tell me this? Because I've been thinking about what's next too. The silence shifted. Not heavy, but full. That night, she stood on the boarding house porch while Yates saddled his horse. He paused before mounting. I'll be back tomorrow, he said. Kala hesitated, then touched his sleeve. I'm glad you stayed. He stood still, then said, so am I. She let her hand fall, and he rode into the dark. In her room, she unfolded a letter she'd written but not sent, her handwriting precise, the paper worn from rereading. She added a line before folding it again, then walked it to the post office herself. By late July, the valley grasses browned at the edges, crisping under relentless heat. The river dwindled, its waters sluggish between sun-warmed stones. Kala still walked the quiet banks, but now children from the school trailed her, half curious, half attached. She never shooed them, though she said little. Learning silence could invite trust. That afternoon, she found Yates in the supply yard behind the blacksmith, scraping rust from a broken gate's hinges. I got a letter, she said evenly. He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. From Kansas? She nodded. They forwarded my petition to the county clerk. Said I'd need to appear in person for any claim to be considered. His jaw tightened, but he asked only when. 2 weeks. She glanced at the gate. Fixing that for Heron? Wasn't waiting on him to do it. She crouched beside him, picked up the sanding cloth, and started on the other hinge. I'll need someone to ride with me. He didn't answer immediately, his eyes on her steady hands. The faint bruises still lingering beneath healed skin. You sure you want to walk back into that place? I don't want to, she said, meeting his gaze. Zutokari no ieni kodo motachi o oiteo kukoto wadechima not now that I'm stronger. He folded his legs, their knees nearly touching as they worked. Then I'll come. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. The next day, she borrowed a ledger from the schoolhouse, copying legal terms, court instructions, and names from the custody hearing. She didn't ask Yates to help read, but when she paused, he slid a rolled map toward her. This is the county line, he said, and this is where your husband's property sits, if it hasn't changed. She traced the ink. You've been there? Drove cattle through years ago. Big white house. 2 gables. New fence then. Her mouth tightened. That's it. He watched her, then said, you'll need a place to stay there. You won't sleep under his roof. You won't have to. She looked up. You planned this? I don't like leaving things to chance. She closed the ledger slowly. You always like that? I've seen what happens when people aren't. The next week blurred with preparation. She worked mornings at the schoolhouse, afternoons writing letters to anyone who might vouch for her. Miss Cartwright offered a character statement. Dr. Keller agreed to send a note confirming her injuries and recovery. At sunset on the last evening before departure, Kala sat on the feed store porch, boots dusty, skirt hem damp from the pump. You ever think, she asked, how strange it is you found me at all? Yates leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. I think about it more than I say. She turned toward the street, where a wagon creaked past, heavy with grain sacks. If you hadn't been there. I was, he said, quiet but certain. She didn't speak for a while. I don't know what to do once I has them. I don't have land, not even a horse of my own. You'll have what you need. I can't ask you to carry all this. You didn't ask, he said, stepping down and turning toward the stables. You just handed me half without knowing. She followed without a word. The stable air smelled of leather and hay. His mare was saddled, and beside her stood a smaller roan gelding. Its coat brushed to a gleam. A riding skirt and coat lay folded on the tack bench. "That's not mine," she said. "It is now," Yates replied. "Figured you'd want your own horse." Her hands tightened, but she didn't speak. He stepped toward the door. "We leave at first light." She lingered, one hand on the gelding's withers, throat too tight to speak. That night, sleep eluded her. The wind rattled the shutters, and saloon voices drifted through the dust. She lay still, eyes open, thinking of Willa's small hand, Weston's laugh when he tripped running too fast. At dawn, she waited outside when Yates rode up. "Ready?" he asked. She mounted without answering. They rode east, the sun rising slowly, casting long shadows across the prairie. She didn't look back. They crossed the low country, the land flattening into brittle grass and scattered cottonwoods. By the second day, wind pushing everything forward. Kala's thighs ached, but she said nothing. Yates kept pace, never rushing or slowing unless she did. By the third morning, dust coated their clothes like a second skin. Few travelers passed, offering only curt nods, eyes lingering on Kala's borrowed coat, her jaw sharp beneath her hat. She no longer flinched under their gazes. They camped that night by a dry ravine, the fire low, walled with stones. Yates handed her a tin plate and sat across. Boots stretched toward the heat. "I thought I'd feel more afraid," she said, pulling apart a biscuit. "Coming back?" He glanced up from his jerky. "Why don't you?" Her eyes stayed on the fire. "Because I'm not alone this time." He didn't answer, folding his arms across his knees, watching the flames. The silence was no longer empty. She leaned back against her saddlebag. "What made you stay in Montana?" "Ever think of leaving?" "Once," he said. "After my father died. Thought I'd head south. Maybe San Antonio. Couldn't leave Ma to run the place alone. Then the herd grew, and the land got into my bones." "You still have family there?" "Just my mother. She remarried last spring. Moved north with my aunt. Said she was tired of the same sun over the same hills." Kala pulled her knees up. "I never had a place that felt mine. Just rooms I passed through." "You'll have one." She looked across the fire. "You mean that?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." The wind carried the scent of mesquite. She watched him, then pulled a folded cloth from her saddlebag and passed it to him. He unfolded it carefully, a faded ribbon, once pink, now nearly white. Her fingers twitched as she let it go. "Willa wore that the day I took them." She dropped it in the wagon. "I didn't know I'd kept it until weeks later." Yates laid it across his palm, folded it slowly and handed it back. "You'll put it in her hair again." Kala tucked it away and lay back, eyes on the stars. They reached Kansas City 2 days later, a sprawl of wood and brick. Streets loud with wagons and rail cars. Kala kept her hat low, coat buttoned, walking beside Yates with squared shoulders, not reaching for his arm though he stayed close. The boarding house sat near the warehouse district, a modest 2-story with thin curtains and a half-painted porch. The landlady gave them a room with 2 cots and a basin of clean water, asking no questions. Kala stood at the window once the door closed. "The courthouse is 4 blocks away. We'll go first thing." She turned to him. "I don't want you in the room unless they ask." Yates nodded. "I'll wait outside." She hesitated. "It's not because I don't want you there." "I know." "Then why aren't you arguing?" "Because you've decided." She gave a short breath, almost a laugh, and sat on the cot's edge. "It's strange. I thought coming back here I'd feel like drowning, but now I feel ready." Yates leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You've already done the hardest part." She looked up. "Which is?" "Living through it." The next morning she wore the same riding skirt, hair pinned tightly. She didn't speak as they walked to the courthouse. He waited on the steps while she climbed alone, back straight, hands steady. At noon she stepped outside, blinking into the light, and walked to him, her face unreadable. "They agreed to reopen the petition," she said. "I have to prove I can support them. Show I have a home, income, a stable place." The judge said, "I'll need an affidavit from someone I live with, someone who can speak to my character, my work." Yates met her eyes. "Then I'll give it." She pressed her lips together. "It'll tie your name to mine, in writing." "I don't care about names." She shook her head. "This isn't a favor." "I know." She looked at the folded paper in her hand. "They'll send someone to verify it all. I have a month to prepare." Yates didn't hesitate. "Then we'd better be home before fall." "Home," she said softly. He reached out, not touching her but close. "That place I told you about, near the stream. It needs someone who knows how to start again." She smiled just enough. "That someone might be me." They didn't speak again until they stood at the rail yard, horses saddled, dust rising. Kala turned to Yates, voice low. "I want them to grow up knowing what it means to be safe, loved without cost." He met her gaze. "Then let's build them a life where that's all they'll know." She nodded, climbed into the saddle, and didn't look back as they rode west. Not from fear, but because everything she needed was beside her. They returned to Montana in late August's gentle curve, shadows stretching longer as the heat eased. The journey back was quiet, not from exhaustion but from a settled certainty needing no words. As they crested the ridge overlooking the valley west of Red Rock, Kala slowed her gelding, gazing at the land nestled between cottonwoods and the creek's slow bend. The Rourke cabin's tin roof was rust-dappled but standing, the porch sturdy, the barn leaning firm against the wind. "This it?" she asked quietly. Yates nodded. "Needs work. Roof leaks in 2 spots. Fencing soft along the north edge." She turned to him. "We buying or borrowing?" "It's yours. Deeds in your name. Transferred last week." She blinked, lips parting. "Why?" "Because you can't build something real on someone else's land." Her hands tightened on the reins. "Yates, that's not—" "I know it's more than you asked for," he interrupted gently. "But it's not more than you deserve." She looked away, then back at the cabin. "I don't know how to repay that." "You don't," he said. "You live in it." They spent weeks fixing the place. She sanded porch boards, sleeves rolled past her elbows, while he patched the roof and mended barn doors with fresh pine. Miss Cartwright set a small stove. Dr. Keller brought dried herbs and a worn quilt his sister left behind. Each evening they sat on the front steps, watching the sky darken. Some nights they talked, others they didn't. But he always handed her hot chicory, and she drank it slowly, fingers brushing his when she returned the cup. One afternoon, just before the first frost, a letter arrived. Kala stood under the eaves, thumb pressed to the envelope's seal. Yates stepped down from the ladder, wiping his hands. "From Kansas?" She nodded, opened it, her eyes scanning the page, mouth hardening then softening. When she looked up, her voice was steady. "The court ruled in my favor. The children are being escorted by a matron. They'll arrive next week." Yates didn't ask if she was ready, only said, "We'll ride to meet them." The train arrived under a heavy gray sky. Kala stood rigid beside Yates, gloves clutched in one hand, the other pressed to her ribs. When the door opened, a thin woman stepped down, guiding 2 children. Kala didn't move at first. Willa looked smaller, hair shorter, dress patched. Weston clung to the matron's skirt, eyes wide. Then Willa's gaze met hers. One breath, then another. "Ma." Kala dropped the gloves, knees hitting the platform as her arms opened. Willa ran first, face crumpling as she crashed into her mother's chest. Weston followed, stumbling into her embrace. She held them tight, shoulders shaking, one hand in Willa's hair. "I'm here," she whispered, "I'm here." The matron stepped back, nodding to Yates, who tipped his hat in thanks. They rode home in a borrowed wagon. Willa sat beside Kala, head against her arm. Weston dozed in her lap, hand curled in her shawl. At the cabin, Yates carried Weston inside. Kala followed with Willa, showing her the stove, the folded quilt, the corner where light warmed the room. That night, she tucked them into a small bed, kissing their foreheads with steady hands. On the porch, Yates waited, arms loose, eyes on the stars. She stopped before him. "I don't know how to name what you've given me." He looked at her, lantern light catching his face. "Don't name it. Live it." She reached for his hand. "I want you to stay." "I was hoping you'd say that," he said softly. She leaned in, forehead against his. "I don't just want a roof or a field or a fence. I want you beside me when I wake, something that holds through hard seasons." His thumb brushed her cheek. "Then that's what we'll build." They didn't kiss immediately, standing close, the moment stretching like warm breath. When she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, it was quiet, certain, enduring. After the first snow, Willa stood barefoot on the porch, watching the sun rise over the hills. Kala wrapped her arms around her daughter, chin on her shoulder. Inside, Yates stirred the fire, Weston half asleep in his lap. The cabin smelled of cedar, ash, and something sweet simmering in the iron pot. Outside, the land was still but alive, the creek moving under ice, birds shifting in bare branches. Kala turned to the door, glanced back at the land that was theirs, not borrowed, not promised, simply theirs, then stepped into the warmth, into the life they'd built together.